Here we are in the sanctuary of St. Lawrence of Brindisi Catholic Church, and as you notice, the statue of St. Francis of Assisi. He's born in 1180, he dies in 1226, and he's known as the poor man of Assisi because his primary concern and ministry were to those who were on the fringes of society. In those days, the lepers. If we take a look at the image of this statue, we learn a lot about Francis. We said that he was the poor man of Assisi. His garb reflected that of a pauper. It was a long tunic. It had a hood which protected him against the elements, the wind, the rain, and the sun. You notice around his waist he has a cord. A belt was made of leather and was much more expensive and reflected the wealthier people of his day and age. And so he simply ties a cord around his waist. On that cord you see 3 knots. The knots represent the 3 vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience. Those are the 3 primary constituents, or the 3 primary elements of religious life: poverty, chastity, and obedience. You'll also notice a rosary. The rosary is something that sometimes you see on friars, depending upon their tradition from the province in which they came. This province, the Capuchin Franciscans of the Western American province, also known as Our Lady of the Angels, is founded by the Irish friars. And the Irish friars always wore the rosary. So this statue, which was struck for this church, has a rosary on it to recognize our roots from the Irish friars in the province of St. Patrick. As we look at the body of Francis of Assisi, we see that he has the stigmata. In his right hand, you'll notice that wound on the forefront of his hand, indicating that he had received the 5 wounds of Christ. This takes place 2 years before he dies on a mountain called Mount Alverna. On his left-hand side, you'll notice that his habit is slightly torn, and you see the scar or the wound which Christ received on the cross when the centurion pierced his side with the lance and blood and water flowed out, which symbolizes the sacramental life of the church, baptism and the Eucharist. In Francis's left hand, you see a book. That's the Bible. It's the scriptures, most likely the Gospels, of which he patterned his life after, and when he felt he had been called by the Lord to serve, he opens the Bible 3 times to look for the 3 passages which will speak to how he is to live his life. Farther on down, at his feet you notice a skull. The skull represents the fact that this life is transitory, it's passing, that we will all pass away. It's a symbol of death, not as something morbid, but rather as an opportunity to look to something greater or beyond, which is heaven, which is our purpose, our reason for being on this earth, namely to be with the Lord in eternal life. Beneath the skull, you see another book. That's the Rule. It's the way in which Francis was going to live his life. The founder of every religious community had a rule. Francis wrote his rule in 1209, and it was approved originally verbally by the Pope and then formally later on. The rule is divided in his case into 12 chapters representing the 12 apostles, the 12 tribes of Israel, and speaks to how a friar is to live the life of a simple poor man, living in obedience, without property, and in chastity. So in our day and age, Francis once again gives us a chance to see how do we live our baptismal commitment, to live poor and simply, no matter what our vocation may be, to realize that because of our baptism, we are called to be priests, prophets, and kings, and in our own way, herald to the world the good news of Jesus Christ, as Francis heralded the good news of the Lord in his day and age.